Welcome, everybody. Glad to have you all here. My name is Alex Witt. I'm the anchor of Weekends with Alex Witt on MSNBC, and I'm an NBC News correspondent. We have a wonderful panel here to talk about diversity in the media, inclusion, and how to drive that even further forward. I know there are people in the audience who will be of an entertainment value and focus, also those with a fiscal focus. And listen, financially, promoting diversity and inclusion it really makes dollars and cents, truly. So I'm going to briefly have our panelists begin. I'll have Stacy begin, just give you a quick who they are and what they do, and we'll begin the conversation. And also let you know that if we're able to get time for questions at the end, I will throw to you, and we'll just make sure you wait to get a microphone in front of you so we can all hear your questions. But that's a big if, because we got 6 fabulous people who are going to talk. All right, Stacey, you first.
Dr. Stacy Smith. I'm the founder and director of USC Annenberg's Inclusion Initiative. We look at on-screen, in the recording studio, behind the camera, across entertainment.
It's amazing if you haven't
Thank you.
gone and looked. My name is Gloria Calderon-Kellett. I'm the co-showrunner and executive producer, director, and actor on One Day at a Time, which is currently streaming on Netflix, all 3 seasons. We were just canceled, but we are looking for a new home. And just making other content that is not yet out for specifically women and people of color.
Hi, I'm Katie McGrath. I'm the co-CEO of Bad Robot Productions, a small television and film production company here in Los Angeles. And I'm also on the board of Time's Up. So we work within our company to really think differently about our recruitment and our hiring, as well as with our content creators, and at Time's Up obviously working to create safe, fair, and dignified work for women of all kinds.
Katie's very modest. She's actually one of the founding members of Time's Up, so that started a year and a half nearly ago. Okay, Jacqueline.
I'm Jacqueline Coley. I work for Rotten Tomatoes, which some of you may have heard of, a little movie review site where we outgrade critical reviews. And I'm a former critic and a former writer who can sort of speak to what it's like to be a writer writing about diverse stories or trying to find access for diverse stories. And I'm really proud that prior to joining Rotten Tomatoes and then after, I've been passionately committed to diversity and inclusion in film journalism, and Rotten Tomatoes has just allowed me a larger platform to continue that.
My name is Jonathan King. I run feature film and television production about participant media. I run the scripted side. I have a partner who runs documentary production. Participant was founded almost 15 years ago by Jeff Skoll, who was one of the founders of eBay, to make movies and television that promote social engagement and social impact, and also try to be commercially sustainable. We're a for-profit company, so we try to do both. We have a double bottom line, as we say.
Do you want to also stop being so modest and talk about the Academy Awards?
We had a busy year last year. Our last couple movies were Green Book, which ended up winning Best Picture, Roma, which won a couple as well. We had both RBG movies last year, the documentary RBG and the scripted feature On the Basis of Sex. So that was and we're about to launch our first scripted limited series, which is called When They See Us. It's Ava DuVernay's show about the Central Park 5 case from '89. It will premiere on Netflix on May 31st, so I hope you watch it.
I'm Jody Gerson. I'm the chairman and CEO of Universal Music Publishing. I'm also a founding member of She Is the Music, a not-for-profit foundation that we created to create opportunity for female creators and female executives in the music business.
Okay, impressive group. So let me just start with a couple of facts. Axios, which some of you may be familiar with, it's a terrific website, this morning put out some information that would suggest why we're having this panel. I mean, it's not just because it's the right thing to do for social reasons and cultural reasons. I mean, here's the stats, right? The US is projected to become majority minority by 2045. Next year, in 2020, the entire under 18 population will be minority non-white. In less than a decade, the entire under 30 US population will be non-white. The majority, that is. The trend, it's largely due to the rise in immigrants in both the Hispanic and Asian communities, also in birth rates among non-whites. So the industry can thrive if it chooses to, the entertainment industry we're talking about, journalism as well, as it tries to embrace this reflection of reality, which is so much of what certainly journalism and entertainment has done over the years. And so we're going to talk about where we are now in this conversation, how far we've come, and where we need to go relative to these different facets of the entertainment and music world. So I'm going to start with Stacy, because back in 2017, it's been about a year and a half, right? When the Annenberg School, she's the founder and director of the Annenberg Inclusion Initiative at USC, and also started this really cool thing at Sundance this year, the Time's Up 4%. So talk about those two things and how far you think we've come in dealing with diversity and the benefits of having done so.
Right, and I think that is a very big question, Alex.
I
So
know.
I'm
She has
only
2
going
minutes to answer it.
Okay, I'm going to take part because I really think we need to contextualize where we've been, where we're currently at, and then where we might be going. Where we're currently at is actually this year we're 4 months in. And I could say it's the first time since we've been analyzing media content that I actually have good news.
Great.
On screen and film, we saw an uptick for the first time in 12 years of analysis of women leads, people of color in the lead, women 45 years of older in the lead. These are unprecedented changes when I'm used to a flat line. Every year we do a study, we put out the results, and we wonder how are we going to sell this research that nothing changes on. And so this year, it was the first year that we saw a huge uptick in who's leading the stories, which is amazing. Whether it's Black Panther, Wrinkle in Time, Captain Marvel, Girls Trip, the content is there, but it's almost as if the decision-making finally caught up with audience taste.
What was the catalyst for it? Was it social progressive mores, or was it simple finance? Like, wait a minute, we can make some money. I know Jonathan will lead to the fact that African American films and approaching that population as well and saying, hey, we're going to give you something that reflects you. I mean, they're incredibly lucrative. He's also focused so much on the Latin America community. What is it? Is it money that's driving it, or is it social progress?
I don't think that there's any one factor, and that would be a very simplified approach. Money is one aspect, but you have to understand that Hollywood doesn't often put the same production costs and marketing costs behind films with women and people of color, people LGBTQ, individuals with disabilities. So there's a disconnect. And I think finally the resources behind the content and then audiences showing up for these spectacular stories has matched. Streaming has put pressure, of course, on the industry. And I think the studios are on watch and production companies to keep up. But also activism is at an all-time high. I think with the birth of groups like Time's Up, which I'm committed to and participating in. She is the Music, the Gina Davis Institute, Women in Film. There's a cacophony of voices crying out for change. And with the power of social media, I think the confluence of factors is finally getting us in film to a tipping point. I want to say one other thing about media that's really important is the talent has always been there. And though women's rates of participation are the lowest in music, music is probably the most fascinating place, and Jody can speak to this, where women of color are thriving. They're over 70% of the charts. So music figured this out a long time ago. And I think one of the reasons why we stepped into the music space was to help film and television realize exactly what they're missing out on, because these are global brands and global artists that are killing it in that particular platform.
Yeah, absolutely. Jody should be known, you guys. She was the one who really founded and signed Lady Gaga. That's quite something.
Yeah.
All those years ago you did. I know that you left. That was at Sony, wasn't it? And then you
It was at
left
Sony
there.
ATV. It was
But
before I came
you
to-
left Sony because despite what you had brought in, which was pretty darn extraordinary and giant, there was a ceiling, right? They said to you, yeah, you're only going to get so far because you're a woman in the industry. Talk about that.
Well, you know, I'd worked for the same person for 27 years, and I think it's kind of hard to kind of grow up working for one person and them seeing you kind of as an adult. And I think what happened was I was having tremendous success there, and I finally wanted more. I finally admitted to myself that I wanted to be a chairman of a company. Everybody, all the other guys were getting great roles at other companies, and people thought that I would never leave my boss because I was so loyal to him and we had so much success together. And then I did hit that ceiling hard. And I called Lucien Grange, who's the chairman of Universal Music Group, and I said, I know you've toyed with this idea of hiring me. I'm available. And he said, are you ready to be the chairman of Universal Music Publishing? And I said yes. And I wasn't sure that I was prepared for it. I wasn't sure that it was something I could balance with still having 2 kids at home, 1 in college, divorced. I wasn't, but I took it. And I took it in some ways out of spite because I had to. It would have been embarrassing if I didn't. And I came to Universal, and 4 years later, we've increased the revenue of the company by 40%, and I've turned it into a $1 billion business. We have surpassed this year $1 billion in revenue. I actually can do this. But I also feel like having this platform and being a female chairman has responsibilities. And I think I take it very seriously. It's important that I encourage other women to be able to do what I do, and other women to be able to tailor their jobs accordance with their lives. I think women, I can only speak as a working mother, but we're different than other people. And I think we have to, and I came to this company being proud of being a mother, where for years I pretended I didn't have children. And we're still having success. So I think it's important that I was able to change a culture of a company that was always run by men, and also be able to sign incredible female voices, incredible voices like Adele and Florence and the Machine and Ariana Grande and Billie Eilish and Nicki Minaj, and just tremendous diversity and women, strong women with strong careers who are affecting culture and are affecting the way little girls see women.
And She Is the Music, which you have started as well. You're trying to get more women out there in all facets of music, not just performance, but also production and doing. How much of a steep curve is that?
Well, I think first you have to acknowledge there's a problem, and I'm not sure until Stacey did her report following the Grammys 2 years ago, Stacey, that the data showed how poorly women kind of behind the scenes were doing in the music business. Producers, engineers, songwriters. And we created this foundation for the first time to create sisterhood in the music business. We're a traditionally male-oriented business. And we kind of came together and realized we had so much buy-in. Women were starving in our business to come together. When I first came into the business, there were no other women who were willing to mentor me. Women were fighting for their position to hold on to. So we created this foundation, and we were doing 3 things. We have a mentorship program. We have so that women executives can mentor women who in our business. We have a database of, I think it's over 500 engineers, producers. So if you're looking to hire people in studio sessions, that there's a database. And we've created this really fun thing, which are songwriting camps, where women for the first time are in all female writing camps. And the idea is that most of writing camps, when you write songs for artists, are dominated by men and have 1 or 2 women fighting for their one line in a song. And if you put women in a room, the next session they go into, maybe they'll bring 1 woman. It's creating opportunity, and we're having success, and it's really exciting. But thanks to Stacey for pointing out that we had an enormous problem.
And there's a lot of success, I think, for women now. Perhaps, Katie, as one of the co-founders of Time's Up and the movement, I mean, you made a point of saying this is not just going to be something that we talk about or some big red carpet show with whatever it'll be in terms of representing the unanimity, supporting it. I mean, you've really put your money where your mouth is, literally money supporting women who need to have some legal representation, certainly. But how much do you think Time's Up has changed the picture out there?
Kind of like what Stacey said, I think this is an issue about the status quo. So when we talk about how much we've changed it, I think this is 100-year journey, and we have dented it in places for sure, and we have changed. I think what the norms are for some women in some industries, if they have enough of a sisterhood where they are, and if they're speaking to each other and organizing. But I think largely, we are at the very beginning of a journey that is talking about dismantling a culture, and that doesn't happen. I don't want to sound, not bullish on it, because I think it's the strongest force, the status quo is, but the only thing stronger are people who have, principle and justice on their side coming together, and that is what's happening here. So I think there are incremental gains that have been made, but to your earlier point, though this was born on the red carpet, it was never meant to stay there. And this movement has moved just from entertainment into medicine, academia, advertising, the farm fields, hospitality. There isn't a sector right now that hasn't reached out and isn't organizing, whether they've been public yet or not. That is incredibly encouraging. And the amount of competition, in journalism as well, between women in the past, and I think also, to Jodi's point about the lack of mentorship, historically has been about a real scarcity of opportunity. But there is right now, I think, an awakening around our opportunity to create an abundance of opportunity through the force of, sharing resources, wisdom, and using that leverage wherever possible.
Yeah, but it's a big concept, of course, and you're saying this is a 100-year journey, but in fact it also has to start on micro levels. And I know at Bad Robot, for example, talk about your hiring practices and sort of the mores that you put in, the rules and regulations, like decency and treatment of colleagues. And I mean, it's important. You have to start somewhere and make it in the small world around you, perhaps.
Well, I just think, number one, and I think this is important, any company that says they care about diversity and inclusion and doesn't have the head of that, effort reporting directly to the CEO, I don't want to swear on a panel, but it's BS. They are not serious about that conversation and about that opportunity, to your earlier point, for their business. This is not about being politically correct. This is, it's been clear through the research, and Stacey, could speak to this more fluently than I can, but everything from diverse leadership teams by gender make the right decisions something like 72% of the time, and single sex leadership teams make the right decision, I think, 52% of the time. There is a cost there for shareholders. There are reasons for doing this. So I think, number one, if you really care, then your CEO is prioritizing this. For our company, April Rain, who started the Oscar So White campaign years ago, really brought to the attention that what we were doing wasn't enough at our company. So we created the Bad Robot Rule, which is kind of an adaptation to the Rooney Rule, as you may be familiar, and God bless the Rooney Rule, but its time has come and gone, that in any opening, one woman or person of color needs to be interviewed for that position. Again, it's complete BS. It's 2019. So we created a rule where we interview in proportion to the population of the United States, which means if there's an opening, 50% of the candidates at least need to be women, and 40% at least need to be people of color. And, we operate from spirit of the law more than letter of the law, because this is a very, fluid ecosystem, and to some degree, and in other ways, it's very fixed, and there are pipelines that haven't been developed and nurtured in the way that they need to be. But there are solutions to this. Anyone who tells you that it's hard is right, but it's not anything that you can't overcome with some creativity and, prioritization.
Yeah. Jonathan, I want to have you pick up on a quote that I know you are known to say, which is conventional wisdom lags behind reality. And yet we're talking about this now. But is it just a small microcosm here of the conventional wisdom that you feel is really getting the message out? I mean, how far do you think we have to go? And you can also address not only the differences in the makeups you have with different types of people and cultures, but also I know you do a lot of work on behalf of the LGBTQ societies as well.
Yeah.
So talk about that affiliation with UCLA.
I think, well, I mean, that quote in particular was something I was talking about, specifically about this. There's been a long-term conventional wisdom in the movie business that movies with African American characters are about the African American experience that do not perform overseas. And that is just, it's amazing to me that people still believe that to be true when all the evidence it contradicts that, basically. And we're talking about big movies like Black Panther and small movies like Moonlight and sort of everything in between. And because the movie business is a business as well as a creative endeavor, what it does, if you're willing to challenge conventional wisdom, is create opportunity. For instance, our movie Green Book, many companies did not want to finance that movie because they thought, well, it was not going to have any international value. The movie did well here. It did about $85 million in the US, and it did about $240 million outside the US, including in China, where it made $75 million, and in France, where it was huge, Italy, and because we were challenging the conventional wisdom and said, we're looking at this story, not just the conventional wisdom that because Mahershala Ali is in the movie, it's going to have struggle overseas. It was that's a crazy idea. And it created an opportunity for us on a business level. And one other thing, I sort of just wanted, I'm so glad you're here, because one thing that we talk a lot about inclusion, and like I said, the movie business is a creative endeavor, but it's also a business. And there's so much attention paid on the filmmaker side and the performer side and things like that. But decisions about what gets made happen at the board level and the C-suite level. Right. And I can assure you that most big companies, their boards and their C-suites do not look like this. They look like this. Yeah. And that's just wrong, and it leads to bad decision making, something that Katie was talking about. It's very limited, and it's bad for companies to be constructed that way because it leads them to make outdated assumptions about their, what the audience wants, how the product is going to perform, and it's just, it's just outdated. So. Yeah. And so I think that what, I guess, just to continue that, and I guess a little bit, Alex, what you were saying is whenever, companies are made up of lots of people. Every film or TV show is made up of a big team of people. Filmmaking is a team sport. And what you need to do is make sure that your team represents pretty much every viewpoint that the movie itself purports to represent. Whether or not, because there's so much focus on who's directing this movie, and we need to really do work in that area, but it's also making sure that producers and below the line people and everywhere on the executive side as well, you're representing the different points of view. It makes for better art and better business.
Mm. So on the heels of that, and particularly when you have something of such critical acclaim as has been the case for One Day at a Time, which those of us that are old enough to remember the original One Day at a Time by Norman Lear. This was rebranded and put out there with a Latino cast and leadership in all roles. I mean, she does everything. I question whether she might do catering as well on the show. But here's a show that got huge success with its critics. And we'll get to critics in a second, that's you. But, I don't understand why that got cut, and I don't understand where you're going to go. I mean, why that gets canceled. How frustrating is that when you're putting together a damn fine quality show that is appreciated by such a wide audience?
Well, it's a different time, obviously. And I think it really is important that decision makers are not just in it for the money. They're seeing the purpose of and importance of this type of storytelling. I mean, I became a
That's
storyteller.
what Jonathan's just saying about the reflection of
Definitely,
making the decisions.
definitely.
Yeah.
And seeing too that, there haven't been that many shows where the main characters are Latino. And for me growing up, I did not see my family reflected on television, which I didn't think was a really big deal until I really entered this industry and I started seeing how storytelling and culture making, which is really what all of us are in the business of,
Right.
we are creating culture and we are talking about stories in a way that lift up communities. And so when you are in a very divisive time and there is an erasure of your story, it becomes really impactful in day-to-day life and certainly in policy making, which all steps back to what we're doing today. We're talking about trying to make these places inclusive. And so I am the daughter of Cuban immigrants. My parents came in 1962. They were given a path to citizenship. They were allowed to buy homes and get Social Security cards. And I was born here, and they sent me to college. And now I am and grad school. And now I am making a show about my experience growing up in this country. And so when I was looking at my parents' journey here and what Latinos are going through right now, I looked at a decade before what was happening in the United States. And the number one show on television was I Love Lucy. So a Cuban American was in everyone's homes, and he was lovely and funny and talented and hardworking. And so a decade later, when my parents were seeking asylum, the story was, these are great people, let's help them out. And as a result, Cuban Americans thrive in this country as a result. So I am directly, this has directly affected my life and the life of my family. So to now see what the narco novella culture, which is largely what Latinx stories are, I don't know anybody in a gang, I have no family members, and it's shocking to me that that's all we see on TV. And that Annenberg, because of the amazing work Stacey does, has shown that we are 18% of the population and 6% of roles on television. That's all Latinx roles, not just leading roles, of which we are barely there. And if we are, we're the sixth lead supporting the story of the white male lead. So that's problematic to me. That's problematic to my community because now we see what this culture, what's currently happening with putting children in cages, et cetera. And so it has directly impacted me and something that I'm very passionate in telling. And so when we made this show, I have been the diversity program person. I have been the only woman in a room and the only person of color in a room of white men, many of which were wonderful to me and want so much to help the cause. And I think it's also important when talking about finally holding men accountable for being terrible is lifting up those who have been wonderful. Norman Lear, Mike Royce, so many men who were wildly supportive of me being able to direct my show and be in my show and do all of those things because they saw how important it was. And saying when questions were being asked to them, they'd say, ask her. She knows. She's smart. She's good. And then the extra belief that it gave me to say, all right, this room has to be at least 50% women writers. This room has to be at least, we need not just one gay person, but three. We need to be, so our room made an incredible impact on how the show came together. So to now be able to say to Hollywood, hey, we made a show that's 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, and our room is inclusive and wonderful, and it's possible to make excellence under these circumstances. It's not like, oh, we have this diversity person. It's an additive thing. It can be wonderful.
Wonderful. And again, financial remuneration, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it can also be cost effective.
Yes.
I mean, let's just keep a focus on that. Let's get to Rotten Tomatoes, which we all love.
I love that plug, Lori. Thank you so
very
much.
good, very good.
I'll
That was a good
checks
way in.
afterwards.
Someone giving 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, I mean, we go.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty extraordinary. So the influence of Rotten Tomatoes, but specifically relative to you as a critic in the pursuit of, we'll talk about the diversity initiative that you have there, 3 points that I know, but how do you implement that in the job you you do and what we all see when we go online and check and see what Rotten Tomatoes says about a film or piece of music or television show or whatever it's going to be?
Well, as one of, I guess, the journalists on the panel, I'll maybe try to like summarize this if I was going to put it.
I always ask big questions.
Yeah, I know. And I was like the other journalists on the panel. It's just this idea of we're part of an ecosystem. And everyone on this panel, I think, grasps that. And I think the thing that Rotten Tomatoes did in my job and with everything we do is understanding that it is small, what can cause gatekeeping, what can cause a lack of access, what can cause a lack of accountability when we talk about how we want to implement these programs. Because if you sit down with any executive, you sit down with anyone in Hollywood or the industry, they'll be like, yes, we want more women, we want more people of color. And then when it comes to execution and how we get that done, everyone sort of like leaves the room. Like, I don't know how to do it, there's not enough, and so on and so forth. And I think one of the great things with Rotten Tomatoes is prior to the acquisition of Fandango, there wasn't a roadmap, and there maybe wasn't accountability because, let's be honest, yes, Rotten Tomatoes does aggregate the critical consensus, but I don't hire anyone at Variety. I don't, and neither does anyone at Rotten Tomatoes, and we can only report on what the industry has for it. And so if there is less than 6% women or people of color that are able to review $100 million movies, prior to Fandango, we didn't have a roadmap for how to solve that. But luckily, when Fandango bought Rotten Tomatoes, one of the first things they did was start asking questions to the critics, to the publicists, to the studio, to lovely people like Stacey Smith, get the numbers to find out, well, we're part of this ecosystem, what can we do? And I think that's the reason why the implementation of these programs has been so influential. Because yes, I'm a critic. When I sit down in the seat, I bring my blackness and my womanness to what I'm gonna write about the film, but I'm just one person. And I've had to fight for 16 emails to get into that screening. If I then couldn't get it to—
Why?
this is
What?
Because for some reason, maybe the publicist didn't think that I would like to review Downton Abbey, but she doesn't know that I'm the biggest Anglophile ever. It's assumptions. It is assumptions that is the critical part of this industry, because yes, this is what is so crazy. When it's one day at a time, if you're a Latinx critic or reviewer, yes, you get that phone call, but you don't necessarily get the phone call for Endgame. But there is a part that you can bring to your review. If a disabled critic or a critic with a disability, you may not get the call to review Skyscraper with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, when in actuality, and he even shouted this out on his Twitter, that's sometimes the best review for him to read because there's a perspective to that representation. And I think the assumptions that I think publicists make and a lot of folks make is what prevented things. And the one thing I will say about Rotten Tomatoes is the assumption business was very much over by the time I joined the staff. It was about the investigation and the implementation business.
Where do we stand, Stacey, on minority leadership in the large companies? In
Across the
entertainment?
6 studios, it's not good. And what's really interesting is that as power increases, women's participation decreases. So you'll see women at the SVP level, at the fewer at the EVP level, and almost non-existent, right, at the CEO or top decision-making roles. But also a set like a film or a TV show. The leader is the director or the showrunner. And just to Gloria's point, to understand, I mean, fact check me if I'm wrong here, I think the Hispanic Latino community commands about $1.7 trillion in revenue. But across the top 1,200 films over the last 12 years, there's only been one Latina director. One. What? So there's a complete disconnect between the authenticity of how do you tell a story, how do you assemble writers, less than 4% of critics are women of color. And, right before this, I don't want to, engage in a lot of self-disclosure, but it was great to go to the restroom and attend a conference and go right in. There was no line. And so this got me thinking yesterday, did you know at Milken, just out of curiosity, that there are 373 participants today at Milken, and 75% of them are white, and 72% of them are male.
I guarantee you any woman of color walking these halls noticed it.
Right. But it gets worse because we just can't talk about gender and we just can't talk about race, ethnicity. We have to talk about the intersection of the two. And this is why it's important. We need to have metrics, set goals, and evaluate how we're doing vis-a-vis those goals. 30% of the U.S. population are men of color, Caucasian men. 30% are Caucasian women. 20% are women of color. 20% are men of color. But at this conference, 53% are white men today participating. Only 21% of the participants are Caucasian women, and only 7% are women of color. This needs to change from the top of Milken. Decisions behind the camera, the writer's room, showrunners, these change because people like Katie McGrath and Jody and John say, we need to have inclusive practices when it comes to interviewing and deciding who should be gearing up in terms of leadership perspective. So it's a complete, what I like to call, adventures in missing the point. Most places where I go, because people are being erased. And the story that Gloria told about her experiences coming to this country are no different than the LGBT community and marriage equality. We wouldn't have marriage equality without Will and Grace and The Ellen Show.
That's right.
Period, right? And we wouldn't have the ability to have transgender individuals have rights and privileges without portrayals. And across 400 films over the last 4 years, there's only one transgender female who's shown in a disparaging light and is on screen for less than 10 seconds. So we have a lot of work to do, and people like Jody, who are at the top, we need to be pushing our sisters and supporting and lifting them up as they go down that journey. And then we need to be like Game of Thrones, if you watched last night, all hands on deck, supporting them.
Spoilers,
to get them-
Stacey.
Don't tell me too much.
I kept it neutral, but it's important. So, sermon over.
Amen to that. Not that it's over, but everything she said. So, John, I want to ask you about messaging, and from a couple of vantage points. First of all, Green Book, which was an outstanding film. I would love to tell you afterwards of the places where I cried because it restored my faith in humanity. I'll just tell you, it was that second time they were pulled over by the cop on the way home. I cried because I was expecting what happened the first time. And I went, God bless, and it was just, it was wonderful. But you have a film like that then got criticized by some saying, oh yeah, it's not really real, or it's from the, perspective of the white guy and the black guy and, big kumbaya moments. And coupled with that, which you may not speak to directly, but have an opinion about, when I think about the criticism that Spike Lee got at the Academy Awards afterwards, the way that he turned his back when his film was not the victor for Best Picture, and the way that he, answered back the Q&A afterwards when he was being awarded and had in one hand his new Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay for BlacKkKlansman, but it wasn't for directing. And he had a glass of champagne in the other, and he got a lot of backlash about a level of sort of a flippant approach. So, and you might have an opinion on this too, because I know you have a background in public relations, but what are your thoughts about that relative to Green Book and the rest of it, and how you maybe had to combat that?
Well, I think I would just reference something that I said a little earlier, is that making any movie is a team sport, and especially when a movie is about people coming together from wildly different backgrounds and perspectives. So no one person is going to represent, no director would represent the lives and lived experience of those two main characters, because they were coming from completely different points of view. So what was important for us and the movie started from, Tony Lip's son hearing stories about it. So that was always going to be the point of view, at least the point of entry on that movie. But what we were very conscious of when we started down the road to make the movie was making sure that, okay, this is a movie about one African-American man who was born in the South but lived in New York, who was also gay, who was single, who was, spoke 5 languages. And so we needed to make sure we were representing that point of view. A northern white guy who was Italian-American, who was not well educated. There were women. There were, we needed Northerners, Southerners, African Americans, white people. And we looked around the table and we sort of checked a lot of boxes, and then realized we had no Southerner and no woman in the room actually. And it's a movie about two guys, but Dolores is a big part of this movie. But we had Black people, gay people, white people, Italian Americans, and Northerners. And so that's when I asked Octavia to come in, who I knew as an actor, Octavia Spencer, who I knew going back to before The Help, actually, but also knew her as a producer and a Southerner. She grew up in Alabama. I really wanted that perspective as well. And so we just looked around and said, is every perspective that we're hoping to represent in the movie represented on the team that's making the movie? And we said yes. And are we going to get some criticism because the director happens to be a white guy? Maybe, but are we doing our job? We think so. So that was both the intention and the process of making that movie. And in terms of what we try to do as a company is engage all different parts of the movie-going audience. And there are a lot of, the audience for that movie is that kind of movie, largely older and largely white. And there was I made the point to someone, I think, that if you believe that older white people don't need to be told to be less racist anymore, because that's an issue from the past, look around, please, because they do. And occasionally you do need to make a movie that is directed at older white people and reminds them to be less racist.
Can I just add one thing, too? I think, and, Jonathan, you obviously know this far better than I do, but from what I understood, I think a lot of the criticism had to do with sort of probably the exhaustion of people of color having stories that center them, be less centered, and often through a white lens. And so I think the challenge that you were up against was not that you weren't thoughtful about the team, but that it was the vantage point of Tony, and that was your decision as a studio. And I think those stories have to be told, as long as we're also telling the stories of the protagonists of color, and in that case, I think, particularly the please remind me the name of the main character, the brilliant pianist.
Oh,
Donald
Dr.
Shirley.
Shirley.
Dr. Shirley. I think that was it. That we make space in our industry for stories that center, the people who haven't had the opportunity to have their perspective drive the narrative.
Totally.
But
Yeah,
Absolutely agree.
I know there was a lot of conversation about Green Book last year, but we might also add, look at the top 5 wins from last year. You had Alfonso Cuarón winning Best Director. You had Rami Malek of Middle Asian descent. You had Mahershala and Regina King. And again, If Beale Street Could Talk, Black Klansman. Last year, we saw the fruits of the labors that Cheryl Boone Isaacs started in the Academy, and we're starting to see that. Regardless of how you feel about this one particular movie, and I literally exist on a website where arguing about movies is what everyone lives for, so I get it. It doesn't matter. Look at, I think on the Oscar night, I think I said 17 of the 20 some odd categories went to either people of color or centered on stories from people of color. Free Solo had, a female woman of color producer. These are all success stories. So I don't love that we're arguing over some aspects of whose lenses is through, but let's be honest, we're getting representation that prior to this moment we were driving through the desert looking for. And I think every step, even if it's a wobbly step, is a great step forward.
And Oscar, so what, was that 3 years ago?
2016.
Okay, so yeah.
3 or 4.
So if you think about it that way, Okay. I mean,
Yeah.
there has been significant, to your point, 17 of the 20. How about the music industry, though, Jody? You're a woman, you're at the top. We know you're, solo on that regard. But when they were talking about the rooms where the executives are making the decisions, how does that get reflected in the music industry right now?
Well, I think things are changing. Sylvia Rhone was just made the chairman of Epic Records. I mean, she's been, in many ways a trailblazer. She's an African American woman who has been a chairman of a company before. And here she is now. She was, I don't know whether she was president of Epic, whatever it was. And L.A. Reid left the company. And she put her head down and worked and had success and was finally acknowledged last week, I think, as the chairman of the company. Well deserved. We have some great female executives. The thing for me is people say that I'm the first chairman of a global company. It's not enough. But there are women who are making their way to the top of our business. And women, I look at my own company and I have women and people of color heading up departments all over the place. It takes a minute to kind of for everybody to catch up.
Yeah.
People like me, I don't know that I thought that I was chairman material. And once I was offered that job, I had a girlfriend who said to me, you got to do this and you could figure this out. So I think the thing about bringing women together, it's that and it's about saying to each other, we could do this on our terms, and we're going to push each other into position in the way that men have pushed their friends into position, and that's okay. But I think you have to acknowledge, if you look at the music, if you look at artists, it's really, incredibly diverse and beautiful, and a real representation of the world. There are incredible Latin artists now that are at the top of the charts, and obviously African American men and women and women with tremendous power as artists. I think the executives, we have to catch up. We just, as women and people of color, we have to catch up a little bit. I just promoted a young man who is African American to head of my A&R department. People in my business like, are you urban or are you pop? Are you what? And I said from the very beginning of my career that I wasn't going to have an urban department. What does that mean, an urban department? Urban music is pop music. Urban music is pop culture. That drives culture all over the world. I was always amazed. I made a movie called Drumline many, many years ago. And I remember at Fox, they were like, oh, it won't do anything outside of America. And I was like, but the music does. Yeah. I don't understand why wouldn't this story resonate outside of America when the music resonates outside of America? I mean, you go all over the world and you hear local hip hop in every country throughout the world.
Yep.
Every country throughout the world. So again, I think it's changing, and I think you just have to be more aware now. When I'm hiring people, I have to just be conscious I run a meritocracy. However, I want I want to make sure that the pool is diverse and that people have opportunity. I think also, as a nod to Stacey, the Grammys put together this task force to look at the problems that the Grammys are having. That's a first. And it's really tremendous. So I think we're getting somewhere. I'm very optimistic.
Gloria, what do we need to do to, as I gave those stats at the very beginning, the level to which we are rapidly becoming a non-white majority country here, let alone what you can say globally. What do we need to do for the Hispanic community, the Latino community specifically? Again, I get so frustrated when I'm less so than you, I'm sure, that when I see a show like One Day at a Time doing so well, and just really illuminating so many of the viewers like me into just the life and, little charming, Latino idiosyncrasies or things that just sort of broadens our perspective. What do we need to do to make sure that these kinds of shows are propelled forward? Is there a solution? Like, what would you want to see happen in the next year or two?
I think it starts with the decision makers. I think last year, from what I could note, and this is not official research like the amazing work Stacey does, but there were 11 pilots that were purchased by Latino creators. of those 11, none got picked up to pilot. So that means that we may be supporting characters in shows that premiere this fall, but there is no Latino family that I know of that is going to be on, but we'll know May 15th, roughly, right, when all the actual pickups get made. So all things being equal, if there's hundreds of shows that are being made every year, and let's say they just weren't good enough, I doubt that, but let's say that's the case, then then the industry needs to be buying 50. So I think it starts there. So for me, part of my work is access. And I think there's information, and I think that for the Latinx population, there's still a vast majority for whom their parents are struggling to make ends meet and to educate them. So I put together I asked Twitter, I said, hey, I want to do a master class and I want it to be free, but you have to just put it out there and it has to be free. And YouTube came forward in 1 second, and Beto Like and BuzzFeed came forward in 1 second, and we shot it. And it's going to be 15 episodes that are available to anyone who would like to know the basics of how to be a TV writer and how to be a content creator. That's going to be out there, because that shouldn't be privileged information. So that's one small thing, right, that they're going to kindly put out, and they're editing it right now. It should be out in the next month or two, so that next year there can be more content creators, because there's more people that have things to say than me. Like, while it's lovely to be able to be on this incredible panel, I've done tons of panels this year because it's me and Tanya Sriracha. We are the two Latina showrunners in all of Hollywood right now. So we need to make more, because I need to be focusing on writing more content, because I am really invested in lifting up this community and telling stories about this community, because I love it, and I think the world should know about it because it's fabulous. So I do think it really is people talking about it. I've been much more active on social media, something that is not comfortable for me, but as a content creator, I've realized it's an important part. If people know what my story is, I'm earnest, I care about it, this is my family, this is my kids, this is my brother, this is my dad, these are the people that I see in my life that are not accurately being represented. So it's very personal. It's very personal for me. So being able to help other people lift up their stories, supervising, which I'm doing a lot of these days, supervising young writers so that I can help them start on the journey, and educating executives who are very well-meaning, but maybe it doesn't speak to them specifically. I had a case recently where I wanted to work with a Latina writer who I think is brilliant, and I spoke to the studio, and they were like, oh, we didn't have a great experience with her last year. I'm like, what? Yeah, you did. I can send you the emails where you said brilliant, amazing, wonderful. What are you talking about? And they're like, well, it didn't really end up, we didn't really resonate. I'm like, did it not resonate with you because this is not your personal experience? Just be aware of whatever your unconscious bias is. We all should, right? We should all be aware of what our personal privilege and unconscious bias is. I am an educated Latina in this country. That's my privilege. I'm white passing. That's my privilege. I know what my privileges are and what gets me in certain rooms and what doesn't. I think all of us need to ask ourselves what those things are and how we can better lift up and support one another.
Yeah. So Stacey, I'm curious, because what was great, I remember you and I spoke last year when we were on a panel with Ashley Judd together at the Milken Institute, and talking about the issues that she had personally faced and the way she overcomes them. But you had some good news when you started out, so it's not all depressing, right? But how steep is the trajectory? I mean, Katie says it's a 100-year journey, and I don't think she's wrong. But how steep is the trajectory to try to find equality, inclusion, and back to the original, focus and relativity of the almighty dollar? How much is that going to help change things potentially more quickly?
Well, I think it's a hard question to answer, right? I have 8 good years left in this space of what I'm going to devote my time and energy to. I want a lot of acceleration to happen in those 8 years. I look at people like Ava DuVernay and what she's done in terms of hiring practices. It can happen overnight. I mean, what music has done in 1 year, film, television, and streaming should look over and say, this is remarkable, right? I'm not holding them up as the panacea, but there's a new head of the Recording Academy who's a female, right, being ushered in. And so I think things can accelerate. One of the reasons why Time's Up and the Annenberg Inclusion Initiative did the 4% challenge is that we wanted to give folks something to do. Hire a female film director in 18 months. Everybody, it was all hands on deck, calls, emails, tweets. And in one activation, over 120 individuals committed to working with a female film director in 7 companies.
Wow.
So next year, by 2019, 2020, those numbers will be radically different. The hope is that we don't go back and we keep moving forward. So it's possible for change to happen quickly, but it really has to happen at the top. And if we bring folks together, set target inclusion goals, hold people accountable to those goals, but also what works and what doesn't work. We also have a pipeline issue in terms of we need to let the world know that Hollywood welcomes women, people of color, LGBT, people with disabilities, people with mental health conditions, because that marketing is still a problem. Because people aren't going to support their kids or the friends of their kids going into an industry where they think they will be shut out. So we have a lot of work to do across the ecosystem.
You know, speaking of marketing, if I'm not mistaken, you are the one who came up with the concept of the inclusion writer.
Right.
Okay. And then Frances McDormand, y'all remember when she won for 3 billboards outside of Ebbing, Missouri, she'd get the shout out at the end, like, inclusion writer. I think more people on the planet were like, wait, what the hell's that? Googling that thing. You know, how much do you feel like people have taken notice of that? And because she shouts it out, because it gets sort of a global attention, how important was that for you? How much did that propel that forward?
Well, I think it was an important moment. I mean, Kalpana Kodagal and Fanchin Cox Giovanni, who I worked on the language with, as well as my team, we had no idea that was coming. We had no idea that WB would have an inclusion policy, right? So now we have one of the 5 that have said yes. Everyone across television and film, they have to have a policy in place to have inclusive interviewing and hiring practices. And Endeavor Content has come on board with an inclusion policy, and many actors and producers adhere to language around an inclusion writer. So you know, I think that different problems have different solutions, and the inclusion writer deals with certain problems in the industry. It doesn't deal with directors. It doesn't deal with the C-suite. It doesn't deal with boards. I mean, boards can change relatively easily. So there's a lot of work to do, but it was one fix for one problem. And that's how we have to think about this. There are many problems. We need to set targets and a path forward for each of those problems, check them off the list, and celebrate those achievements.
Yeah, which is so cool. I mean, every single person on this panel has done something and made a focus specific that people can sign on to. And that's how the change happens. I would love to, in the couple of minutes that we have left, if anybody has a question, raise your hand. Megan will bring over a microphone to you, and you know, you can pose it to anyone specific or whomever. So, to you.
Hi, my name is Beth Brieger. I run a national nonprofit called LIDA that helps talented students from low-income backgrounds get into top schools and careers in an effort to diversify the national leadership pipeline. One thing I've been struck by at many of these panels is how when we talk about the diversity and inclusion space, we conflate race and gender in particular, and also those of other underrepresented backgrounds. And I guess I just wonder, all of you who are experts in the field, are we doing the best we can do by conflating, you know, saying it's, you know, we're talking about diversity, having women represented or people of color, and not talking about those metrics separately, and just what you all think about that, if that's something that we need to work on as well, because I'm always struck by how those issues all get mixed up together in this space.
Anyone want to take a stab at that?
We all need to be as intersectional as possible, and as the data allows for us, we do. But I think I can account for almost everyone on this panel. We disaggregate and intersect every group to ensure that the most vulnerable, the most oppressed, the most marginalized, that we're paying attention to those needs and concerns. And that's what's really important. And anybody jump in if you disagree, but I think the more we can think holistically about individuals' identities and that they're from a variety of different backgrounds. We haven't talked about class today, and that's important in this conversation as well. But we never try to conflate them. We try to intersect them, because it's in the intersection we really see where people are being left out of the conversation, and then you just make room for them right next to you. And that's been the mantra of Time's Up. Mm-hmm. We have to make room for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Time for one more question if someone has one. They're right there, I believe, for Megan. Great. Last question.
Hi. My name's Samantha Ressler, and me and my partner Natalie Love run a performing arts collective nonprofit called We the Women Collective. And something that we've come across that I think might resonate with you guys is how to make it feel inclusionary without making it feel exclusionary to men. And I look around this room, and it's pretty upsetting that, like, you know, the Milken Institute associates are not here and those that are just women. How do we get men involved in the conversation so they can care about this as much as we do?
Go ahead. Sorry, I'm just going to shift that one.
Katie, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because it's a conversation I've had with men friends, but we're, you know, it's not a conversation we feel like appropriating the answer to. So.
That's so woke of you.
John, be woke.
And, well, thank you. But I do think it actually really matters what you have to say, because the truth is, if we even think about just the last 18 months when this issue, you know, that Tarana Burke introduced with Me Too, that then Time's Up grew out of as sort of a vehicle for solutions, it's not that there's been, you know, any absence of analysis, conversation, cultural, you know, references to the inequity. It's incredibly frustrating, to be honest, as we, you know, that men haven't sort of stepped into the void. We have followed them. They have led in every other sector, you know, of our lives, and they're suddenly kind of silent, and it's a huge disappointment. I don't think anyone up here is opposed to or doesn't deeply value the contributions of men of all kinds. They are critical. We are interdependent, and there's no effort in any of this to deny them their space in the conversation. But as Stacey said, especially for white men, they are 30% of the American population. Mm-hmm. So they should absolutely be part of it, but they shouldn't be all of it. And when we need to have this conversation that you're talking about around inclusion, they need to, at the very least, be the 30% of it. And unfortunately, and there are exceptions, and Jonathan is, you know, a leader at his company doing what he can with what he has, which is really heartening. And that's the challenge I think at Time's Up we would give to every man at any level of influence. You know, all the way down to your family and whatever, you know, status of work you have, there are opportunities for you to be awake differently, to engage differently, to be curious, which is, I think, the number one thing missing, whether it's white people for people of color or men towards women. We have a profound lack of curiosity and empathy about what it is to not be centered and privileged all the time. So I appreciate the question deeply, but I'm not so worried about the men feeling left out right now, because we need them and there's lots of space for them to join us. They need to decide this is a priority for them to be part of the solution. Jonathan, just sorry, I know we have to end, but
it's all good.
We gotta hear from
you. No, I agree. It is really up to men, and men also need to understand not to be afraid, basically, of asking questions. Not to generalize, but a lot of men we're talking about are used to giving answers rather than asking questions. And I think that's one thing that we can all just say to men. Ask a question in a respectful way and listen to the answer. Don't give your own answer to a question that you imagine.
Be curious. That's great. Well, all of you were curious to come here. Thank you so much. What a stellar panel. Oh my God. Stacey, Gloria, Katie, Jacqueline, Jonathan, Jody, you guys, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well done. Bravo.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, we gotta ask the man.
Thank you for attending. Please make your way to the next session.